You're looking at the Great Mississippi River. Now we're some 30 to 40 miles south of Memphis, and I'm standing on the east bank of the river in Mississippi, looking west across the river into Arkansas. Now this is a normal day on the river, so it appears to me to be approximately, let's say, 2 miles wide. And I'm trying to imagine how this river looked back in 1927 during the most destructive river flood in United States history. The river is said to have been some 50 to 60 miles wide in places. The three most effective states, of course, was Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana. They say that 14% of the state of Arkansas was flooded. Now this gives some kind of idea of how that 14% looked. As the waters began to rise, armed guards were placed on the levees. Now this was to keep people from on the west side of the river from taking dynamite and blowing up the levees on the east side of the river, and from the east side people blowing it up on the west side, all of them thinking, well, if they blowed it up on the other side, they would get to save their homes. Of course, it was useless because the levees, under water pressure, broke in some 145 places before it was over with. Now, some 27,000 square miles was inundated by the 1927 flood. In some places, water was as deep as 30 feet. This flood cost $400 million, an unheard of price at that time. It killed 246 people in 7 different states. The loss of property and especially crop loss was devastating to the entire nation. Because of the labor force, 75% of Delta population at that time was African American. With flood waters rising, people was told, of course, to go to the highest point, which was the levees. Black American farmers were conscripted to fill in sandbags for the weak levees and for the high water. On the 21st day of April, though, at 8 a.m. in the morning, the levee broke just north of Greenville, Mississippi. Over 13,000 evacuees were stuck on a strip of levee 8 feet wide and 5 miles long. They were without water, food, or shelter for several days. The American Red Cross is credited with saving thousands or hundreds of lives through their relief efforts. Now in Greenville, 69% of the relief camps were comprised of black Americans. And finally, barges were sent to remove families from the levees. And of course, they started with the white families. And then the cotton planters began to complain about removing the black families because they were afraid that if the black labor force ever left the Delta, they wouldn't come back. So they were not permitted to leave under guard. Now, after the flood subsided, some of the black farmers were conscripted to help repair levees under guard also. However, they were paid 75 cents to $1 a day. But the ones that they conscripted to unload relief barges were paid nothing. Now this is different evacuee camps along the river. Now farmland was so devastated that it started the largest migration north, especially to Chicago, for black Americans. Herbert Hoover was the Secretary of Commerce at that time under President Calvin Coolidge. Now Hoover was given credit for much of the relief efforts during the flood. Now this publicity helped elect him President of the United States in 1928. However, he refused to release a report that showed how bad the African Americans were treated during the disaster. causing him to lose their support in the next presidential election. After the 1927 flood, the government built the longest levee system in the world. It protects the river delta today.